This is an interview with Mr. Peter Tamony, retired broker and now writer, who was born and has lived his entire life in San Francisco's Mission District around the vicinity of 24th and Potrero Streets. Today is August 27, 1971. The interviewer is Richard Schaus for the San Francisco Public Library Oral History Project. Mr. Tammy, can you tell me, first of all, something about your family background and your parents?
Yes, my father, Peter Tamony, was born in County Donegal at the Glenties, which are the little glens in the mountains in the north of Ireland. He had a good education, as he was well-spoken and wrote a fine hand. He came to this country in the early 1880s, and he had been preceded by other branches of our family, the first of whom arrived in San Francisco on the day that Casey and Cora were hung by the vigilantes of 1856, who undertook to curb the New York Democrats and the Catholic influence which was growing in San Francisco at that time. Now, my father first went to work as a teamster and then became a conductor on the steam railroad that was built by Adolph Sutro around what is now called Land's End. This is on the outer edge of Lincoln Park and on the hill which is surmounted by the California Palace of the Legion of Honor. This steam railroad ran around to Sutro Baths and to Sutro Heights, which was, and the Cliff House, much of which was built by Adolph Sutro. Seeing that the single men who worked on the railroads and around the shops had no source of laundry service, my father started a laundry service and left the employment of the railroad to start a chain of 3 or 4 laundry shops in the downtown area of San Francisco, around 8th and Market and up through what is now called the inner city of the Tenderloin and out to 14th and Valencia. In those days, laundry was generally, single men's laundry was generally left at barber shops and that sort of thing. This was a profitable business because they must have worked on a 50-50 basis with these steam laundries, which actually did the work and which was delivered by horse and wagon by the laundry drivers. Now, during the 1890s, the steam laundry owners undertook to try to cut the commissions of these laundry drivers and the laundry offices, such as my father operated, to down around 30 or 35%. And my father and other laundry drivers started the Laundry Drivers Union and a cooperative laundry called the Independent Laundry, which for many years was at 18th or rather 19th and Bryant Streets, and then in the 1920s it moved over to 18th and Florida Streets. This was a real cooperative owned by the laundry wagon drivers, and they had a considerable business, which sort of faded away because none of the affluent laundry drivers' sons wanted to go into the laundry business, and their businesses and routes were generally obsoleted, if that's a verb, made obsolete by the laundromats of the night after World War II. so that this laundry was sold to an organization that does laundry work for the big hotels and motels of San Francisco. About 1900, my father went into the real estate business, and right after the fire of 1906, he opened an office at 29th and Mission, Tamony and Company. My father died in 1918, but his salesman operated this this business under the name of Tamony and Company up to the 1960s. It was at 229th Street at the corner of 29th and Mission. Now,
how did he meet your mother?
Well, my mother was born in Macroom in County Cork, Ireland, and as a young girl, and as a teenage girl, she came to this country to a farm of her brother owned near Little Falls in New York. And after she worked on this farm for a few years, she got tired of farm life, and she went to the parish priest in Little Falls and got permission from him to come to San Francisco, which was really pretty bawdy and Barbary coasty in those days. It was in the Wild West, and she wouldn't have gotten permission if she had not had two brothers who were living in San Francisco. When she came to San Francisco, the only work open was housekeeping and that sort of thing, and she became the housekeeper and cook for the Ehrman family, which were at that time an affluent Jewish family, and who still are affluent. One of the boys, one of the Ehrman sons, is still alive today, and he's in his 90s, and he eats every day in the Hoffman Grill down there on Market Street between New Montgomery and 2nd Street. My father and mother met in the 1890s because my father was interested in Irish organizations and in forming hall associations and social groups. They were married about 1897, 98 in the chapel at St. Mary's College, which at that time was in St. Mary's Park in the vicinity of Crescent Avenue and Mission Street. The St. Mary's College grounds became a real estate subdivision organized by the Archbishop of San Francisco in the 1920s, and it's now covered, it's now covered with homes. But around 1900, or maybe earlier, St. Mary's College moved to Oakland, into what is now downtown Oakland. And then in the early 1930s or the late 1920s, it moved over to Moraga in Contra Costa County, where it is now situated. But this chapel was the original church of St. John's Parish, which now has its own church and schools and a convent and that sort of thing out there in that area on the so-called College Hill, as it was known as in the old days. Now, my father and mother had 5 children. One, Francis, my elder brother, died of diphtheria when he was about 2.5 years old. It was custom of my father and mother to take a house during the summer in Marin County or Sonoma County or down the peninsula in San Mateo for vacation. And my father would commute. The United States was rampant with diseases in those days, and my elder brother Francis caught diphtheria in Marin County and died. Now, I was the second born, and my brother Joseph, who was in education all his life, and he was the third born, and a sister, Anita, who died of some sort of a collapse of the intestines or something when she was quite a baby. She died at the age of, maybe a year or so. She could probably have been saved under present conditions. And my sister Kathleen, who was born in 1907, the year after the fire, and with whom I now live, was the fifth child. So there were three of us. My brother has, I never married because while I was working for the Crocker Bank when I was around 20 or 21, I had been a 6-footer, much to the delight of my father, since the time I was 14 years old. So I was tall and thin. And after I went to work and hustled and this and that sort of thing, I got tuberculosis, which was also a prevalent disease. That is, it was a scarehead disease in those days. But the first couple of physicians, my own physician and the Crocker Bank physician, failed to recognize it. And I had a bad hemorrhage one night after I returned from the University of California, Berkeley, where I'd gone to see a basketball game, and this was the flare-up. I spent a year in a sanitarium at Redwood City, Canyon Sanitarium, which is now the San Mateo County tuberculosis facility, and which was then run by a very able doctor by the name of Ralph Shire, who's since dead, but who was the chief of the TB section at San Francisco General Hospital in the 1910s. My sister never married, but my brother married and has 3 children, all of whom have large families. In the 1930s, he was principal of the school at Preston Reformatory at Ione in Amador County, but in 1940, he went into the Mountain View High School district because he didn't want to rear his family in the prison atmosphere of the reformatory. He retired just a few years ago as principal in charge of Vice at Los Altos High School, which is in the Mountain View High School district. In his, as his retirement years came up and the area around Los Gatos and Mountain View grew so rapidly in the 50s, he was offered a couple of principalships, but he was reluctant to take them because he thought they should be given to younger men who would introduce policies that they could follow through on for more than 4 or 5 years.
And you were born in 1902?
1902.
Where was it? What part of the city?
Well, I was born at 1109 Potrero Avenue, near 23rd Street, right across the street from the San Francisco General Hospital. Now, before the fire of 1906, my parents moved to this location where we are now, 2876 24th Street. And I well remember the earthquake, the morning of the earthquake. I recall the chandelier swinging in our living room, and the extent to which my mother was terrorized as she gathered her 3 little children around her. I can very well remember this, and it wasn't told me. Now, I don't recall anything much else of the fire because a few days after, when people were prohibited from cooking in their homes, they had to cook everything in the streets for a long while, for maybe 60 days, until all the chimneys could be examined. You see, the fire that started in downtown San Francisco was bad enough. That wiped out the whole of the South of Market. But a fire which started around noontime out in the Hayes Valley district, where a woman put on some ham and eggs for her family, not knowing that the earthquake had ruined the brick chimney. This so-called ham and eggs fire started the fire which extended down into town and burned out the city hall and came over Market Street and out into the Mission, finally getting out to around 21st and Mission. This was an accidental fire, and because of this fire, people had to take their stoves out into the streets where they cooked, as I say, until their chimneys could be examined and that sort of thing. Now, in this crisis, we moved out to Silver Heights, where my father's brother, John Tamony, I think his name was, had a dairy ranch, some cows and a barn and a two-story house. And we were joined by as many people out there as the premises could accommodate. And we went for our food supplies down to the relief station, which was situated on the grounds of the Hebrew Home for the Aged at Silver Avenue in Mission. Do you know where that is? This is a very, at that time the buildings were framed, but this place has been rebuilt, and it's a very lavish place where older Jewish people who leave their property to the society that runs the corporation can retire for lifetime, and they live in circumstances similar to the best service in the St. Francis or the Mark Hopkins or the Palace Hotel. They have everything there. So I don't recall, my mother said I used to run down to, I would have been about 4 or 5 years old then. I used to run up and down from my uncle's ranch to the relief station and that sort of thing like a deer, but I have no recall of that.
And then you moved back to 24th Street area?
Yes, we moved back here, and we've lived here ever since. My father bought a building on Howard Street between 17th and 18th. And during the earthquake, this 3-story flat building was toppled off its foundation to the extent that it leaned over on the building next door. Now, this was the most photographed building of the San Francisco earthquake and fire because it was the only structure that was picturesque and remained unburned. And it was photographed by many, many photographers, professional and amateur, who came to San Francisco to visit after the fire. My father had to tear down this building, and what material he didn't sell to others. Building materials were very scarce and expensive for several years after the fire. What material he didn't choose, he brought out here to 24th Street to remodel the building we're in now and the building next door. These buildings were originally 2-story dwellings, and he raised both buildings and he put stores in underneath and extended the dwellings, the flats, out to the street. The flats were originally set back, the 2-story dwellings were originally set back about 25 to 30 feet from the property line of 24th Street.
And you went to school in this neighborhood?
Yes, I guess I was about 5 or 6 years of age when I went to St. Peter's Boys' School, which was run by the Christian Brothers, who also taught at Sacred Heart College at Ellis and Franklin Streets. In the 19th century and into the 20th century, many high schools were ameliorated with the title of college. They weren't colleges at all, they were merely high schools. Thus, there was Sacred Heart College and Cogswell College over at 26th and Folsom Streets. Yes, I went to St. Peter's School, and I graduated from there, from the high school. And this is all of the so-called formal schooling I ever had.
Was this neighborhood primarily populated by Irish Americans?
Irish Americans and Germans, working people and small businessmen and that sort of thing. These people came here largely because of the industrial areas over the Pereira Hill and out San Bruno Road, and because of the climate. But after the earthquake and fire, the people who were closely packed in town, say inside of about 11th and Market Streets to the north and east to the bay, these people were dispersed all over the outskirts of San Francisco. For example, there were many Jewish people south of Market. Many of those went out to Daly City, such as the family of Art Rosenbaum, the sports editor of the Chronicle, who was a brother to Jack Rosenbaum, the columnist of the Examiner. They went out to Daly City and grew up in that area. Others went out to San Bruno Avenue around Silver, where there were many, many Jewish families, to the extent that there were a couple of small synagogues there, which went out of use probably in the 1940s as the second generation and third generation Jews made it and went down the peninsula and whatnot. Now, the Italians began to come in from North Beach after the fire, and my father sold some of the first Italians' property up around, well, above Army and Folsom Street, where there's a considerable Italian colony, as they used to call them, there. Of course, there were Italians in this neighborhood. For example, the Mariana family had a hardware store at the corner of 23rd and Florida, because at one time 23rd Street was the main street in this area, but it was replaced by 24th because the car line, which started at the Ferry Building, came out Howard Street and turned east into 24th Street. It was known as the East 24th Street car line. So where the Italian flower growers and truck gardeners on the east side of the San Francisco Peninsula came in the old San Bruno Road, which followed around the hills before Bayshore Boulevard went in and straightened everything out. These people came through old San Bruno Avenue and came up 23rd Street on their way to the produce markets. And they passed Mariana's store, which was established in the 1880s. Now, after the change after the car line came into 24th Street.
When was that?
Oh, that was very early in the 1880s, probably. It was first, I think it was first a horse car and then a cable car. And I think there was a turntable down at 24th and Potrero. But with the changes and the fact that the Italian produce gardens started to be installed around what is now Coleman, in through there, these produce men and their trucks came along Mission Street. So this Mariana family moved or rather started a branch hardware store, which became their principal business, out on Mission Street between 29th and 30th, where they owned a considerable, maybe 300 or 400 feet of frontage there, which was in the 1910s and 15s was occupied by the Lyceum Theater, other stores, and their hardware store, and which is now the site of a Safeway store that went in there with this enormous parking lot about 4 or 5 years ago. So there were always a few Italians here, but they came over here as scavengers and barbers and that sort of thing, principally after the fire. And my father always liked to deal with Italians and sell on real estate because all they wanted was something that they liked at a reasonable price, whereas the Germans and wise-ass Irishmen were always trying to beat the commission. You know, they were just smart guys in general. Now, I also remember when the Russian Molokans came to San Francisco. This was right after the fire, 1907, 1908. These people had been recruited by Klaus Breckel's organization, the California Hawaiian Sugar Company, for stoop labor in the Hawaiian Islands. And they went, they came from the south of Russia, from Kars, on the borders of Turkey. So they came through the Mediterranean and practically across the Atlantic straight into Texas. And when they got to Texas and were approaching the Pacific coast, they were told that labor was needed to help rebuild San Francisco. And probably about half of them came here to San Francisco, and they settled where they are now on the Southern Heights and on the east side of the hill there, principally because there was steam and hot water available at the Southern Pacific roundhouses in the freight yards in that area of San Francisco, south of 16th Street and in there where there are these downtown railroad yards. These people and the Italians, who were reluctant to pay the $1 or $2 that was required in St. Peter's School at that time, and many of them were Garibaldi revolutionists anyhow. They left the church in Italy and they wanted it to stay there with the Papa, the Pope. These people attended public schools to the extent that probably around 1910 or 12, the city built a new two-story school on Bryant Street between 22nd and 23rd, which was called the Bryant Cosmopolitan School. This was evidence of ethnic inroads. My father gave a talk at the dedication of the school, and I quizzed him about the meaning of cosmopolitan, and he told me it was all races and that sort of thing. Now, the Spanish-speaking people, of course, have been in California since the earliest times, but before the earthquake and fire, and for a long while after, they were principally over in North Beach, where their church is there on Broadway, a couple of blocks up from the nightclubs. The Spanish-speaking people who now live in this district came into the area largely in the 1930s from south of Market Street, where they were thrown out of their housing by the building of the approaches to the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge.
Oh,
you see,
Rincon Hill area?
Yeah, the Rincon Hill was sort of leveled, and all of the housing that was built after the fire, of course, all of these housing, this housing in small flats, had been occupied by these Spanish-speaking people, many of whom were employed packing Chesterfield cigarettes around 3rd and Brennan Streets, where Liggett and Myers had an enormous warehouse and packing plant. Now, I thought that these people, with a background of sort of the, what's that opera that the cigarette girl is in? Carmen, yeah, I thought this is cute. Liggett and Myers to hire Spanish cigarette makers. But actually, these Spanish people had been hired in Spain to also go to the Hawaiian Islands by Claus Freckles and the California Hawaiian Sugar Company.
People from Spain. Right?
These were actually
not Mexico.
Right, they weren't from Mexico, no. The Mexicans tended to stay at farm labor in the valleys. These people, many of them were in Spain, were recruited in Spain, and when they got to the Hawaiian Islands, they couldn't take the stoop labor. Neither could the Russians, probably. They weren't that hungry. The stoop labor in the islands, of course, has largely been done by Filipinos and Japanese after the 1910s, say. Now, these people came back to came back to the mainland, and they went to work in these different industries in the South of Market, and they lived in that area until the 1930s, when they began to come out into the mission.
And these weren't particularly Basque Spanish people from the Basque area.
No. The family I was principally associated with was the Prietos. Tony Prieto, after World War, he was a high school graduate in San Francisco, and after World War II, he went to Hobart College in New York, which was the situs of instruction in pottery and that sort of thing, ceramics. And he became a famed national prize-winning ceramicist and instructor over in Mills College in Oakland. And he ran the pot shop there for many years until his early death. He died fairly young. I don't think he's probably about between 40 and 50. His brother became a baseball player in the Pacific Coast League and that sort of thing. And both these fellows in the family, they were born in Spain. Now, the people who now, originally 16th Street was their locale. But with the great immigration from the Central American areas, the Central American states.
When did that start?
Well, that seems to me to have started quite recently, in the last 15 or 20 years. They have moved into this area, along with a very few Puerto Ricans who live up on the south end of Southern Heights, which is principally populated by Russian families. These Puerto Ricans are very Negroid in action and in menace. They're very short. They don't look very trustworthy. In any event, in the last 6 or 8 years, the center of the Spanish-speaking culture, such as it is, has moved from 16th to 24th Street, and St. Peter's Church and Parish here is more or less their church now. So these were the...
when did the Irish and the Germans begin to move out of this area?
They began to move out shortly after the fire.
Oh, that's it?
Yeah. The second generation were making it. You see, a lot of Irish had been in this country for many, many years. They were principally miners up in Grass Valley and Nevada City and those places. And as the mines petered out up there, probably in the 1890s or so, many of these shorter Irish people came to San Francisco. There are many, if you're Irish, of Irish descent, you know the different types of Irishmen, and they have their county characteristics. the people from the mountains are sometimes big and thick, whereas the thick-headed, I mean dumb, the north of Ireland Irishmen who've been closest to England, they generally tend to go into business, such as my father, whereas the southern Irishmen, the so-called bottle stoppers, which is a pun on County Cork, or laborers, they went to work for the utilities or the cities and that sort of thing. The Irishmen of Ulster, where all the trouble is today, the Catholic Irish of Ulster, are called Fardoons. Now, Fardoon means the Black North, and these people are supposed to be crafty and whatnot. And business people, merchants, dry goods men, and bakers, and skilled mechanics and whatnot.
You mentioned the church here. What was the name of it?
St. Peter's Church.
Is that the one that Father York?
Yes.
Church? Could you
yes.
talk about him?
Yes, Father York was probably the greatest influence, one of the great influences of my life, and one of the most influential Irish Americans of his time, which was from the 1890s to the time of his death on Palm Sunday in 1924. In the 1890s, he carried on a theological controversy with the American Protective Association. Have you ever heard of this?
No.
Well, these people were called APAs, and if you called to call an Irishman an APA was 10 times worse than calling him a son of a bitch. There were little verses like, "For calling me an APA, you now lie undercover." In other words, "I'll kill you, you bastard." In any event, after this controversy of the 1890s, the publications of tracts, pamphlets, books, and that sort of thing, Father York, incidentally, was one of the great English-speaking orators of his day, when people had to speak without microphones and whatnot in big halls. He took the part of the laboring people in the Teamsters strike of around 1902, when James D. Phelan was mayor of San Francisco. Phelan was one of the Irish who came, his family came into the state before the 49ers, before the Donner Party. The Murphys and the Phelans owned Market Street from O'Farrell, that whole block down there, from Grant Avenue to 4th Street, where the Phelan building stands, and where Grodin's is now, and all around the block. They were enormously wealthy people as Phelan became United States Senator. In any event, Father York was a rabid controversialist, and he reviled Phelan in essay and verse and that sort of thing, to the point when when the Teamsters strike was won, even though policemen were put on the trucks of non-union Teamsters, Father York had been up against the establishment, and he was charged with modernism in his theology, and he was he sought refuge. He was relieved of his faculties for a while. The faculties are the credentials to the certification to preach and say mass and that sort of thing. And when a priest is relieved of his faculties, he is not a practicing priest. In any event, in those days, St. Peter's Parish had a sort of special status in the diocese because it was autonomous in a way, because it was one of the first 3 or 4 parishes in San Francisco, and the pastor had powers to grant faculties independent of the archbishop. So Father York was sent to Rome to be straightened out, and when he came back from Rome, probably about the time of the fire, he was still interested in the labor movement and politics, and on the Republican side, he was appointed a regent of the University of California. Afterwards, in the 1910s, Father Casey, his protector, died about, probably 1912, 1915. And Father York, who had been assigned to St. Anthony's parish in Oakland, which was an old Irish parish, was given St. Peter's. And
But he was here when you went to school?
He was here when I went to school, and I was his altar boy and that sort of thing. And I admired him greatly because of his writings and his library and that sort of thing. He greatly influenced my life. He was a very handsome man, and his picture hung in all Irish Catholic homes in the 1890s and in the 1900s. It was framed in the living room or in the parlor, as they used to say in those days. He was a great hero of the Irish. Now, he was leading a pastor's life in a good parish, which was still largely second, third generation Irish Catholics, when some young priests who were red-hot revolutionaries because of the troubles, as the Irish say, of 1916, came to San Francisco from Ireland. You see, up to comparatively recently, San Francisco, the Diocese of San Francisco, was a missionary field. That is, it didn't produce enough priests out of the people to take care of the religious ceremonies and whatnot. So the priests were recruited in Ireland to come out here by the archdiocese, and about 1914, at the time of World War I, some of these younger priests, these hotheads, riled Father York up again, and he was in the forefront of the opposition to joining England in the war against Germany in World War I, and he was accused of sedition and arrested and that sort of thing. And he became a source of, he in San Francisco became a source of funds for the Irish Republican Army, and when the Republic of Ireland was established, and Eamon de Valera, the president, came to the United States, he always stayed at the parish house across the street for a day or two, because Father York was one of his principal supporters. Now, Father York died in 1924, and there's still a pilgrimage to his grave in Holy Cross Cemetery every Palm Sunday. This is organized by the Irish societies, and it's supported by many of the unions that he helped, principally the Teamsters Union. During his lifetime, the Teamsters Union presented him with a very elaborate tea service, the tray of which I remember seeing often. It was pretty nearly as big as this table, and it was engraved, and it had these rich silver teapot and the tea service, which was one of the things that, one of the accoutrements of a lavish home or a parish house or that sort of thing.
Were many of his parishioners Teamsters? Was that part of the reason?
Yeah, they were Teamsters and laborers, and San Francisco had always been a labor town. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, most of the labor rackets started here in San Francisco around the rebuilding of San Francisco after the earthquake and fire. For example, the Carpenters Union would not install in any building any finished lumber that hadn't been milled in San Francisco. You know what millwork is? It's the finished doors and moldings and that sort of thing. Now, each piece of milled lumber had to bear the seal of the Millmen's Union, which was a part of the Carpenters Union. And this was this operation and others were the basis of the 1920 rackets that were prevalent in New York and Chicago, and the base and superstructure of the New York Electrical Workers Union, who are now the highest paid people in the country, because every goddamn piece of electrical equipment of any kind that goes into a building in New York has got to be made in New York City. And they have this elaborate inspection system. Of course, much of the millwork that was put into San Francisco was put in under counterfeit. It was a purple rubber stamp, a characteristic purple rubber stamp, but that appeared on each piece. And of course, this was counterfeited by the lumber makers and whatnot. But there was a book published around 1940 by the University of Oklahoma Press on this start of the racketeering in labor in San Francisco. Unfortunately, I loaned this book to the head of the Labor Council, and it's like all other books that are loaned. I mean, he's no worse a book thief than anyone you loan a book to. But I've never seen it since. I've never been able to find the book again. But it's a well-known book. I think I could run it down if I had to.
When was the street changed name for York, for Father York?
Oh, well, yes, it's the York Way. After here about when did they start that redevelopment of the so-called Negro ghetto west of Van Ness Avenue, 2 or 3 blocks, starting 2 or 3 blocks west of Van Ness Avenue. I guess about 10 or 12 years ago, 15 years ago, they began buying up, wrecking those old buildings from Franklin Street on out to about Geary. And when they had much of this land cleared, they built a couple of short diagonal streets across, catty-cornered across blocks, or 2 blocks, I can't recall which. One of these was named for Starr King, whose body, who was a minister, and whose body is buried in front of the Unitarian Church at Geary and Franklin Streets. Have you ever seen that grave? Yes. The other was named for Father York as a compliment to the Catholics, because the cathedral was in Van Ness Avenue in that district, and the new cathedral, of course, being on the so-called Cathedral Hill in that area, the new St. Mary's Cathedral, which has just been finished. For my part, I think that cathedral was burned down. It was a wooden structure building, and my father told me he worked on it when he first came to San Francisco. It was a redwood structured building, a very elaborate carpenter's Gothic. You know, there's a difference between Victorian and carpenter's Gothic. Carpenter's Gothic is the creation of millmen, you know, all these gewgaws and whatnot. And much of the stuff that's printed in California Living in the San Francisco Examiner is Victorian, you know, these 2 flat buildings and 2-story ordinary homes are not Victorian at all. If they have any decoration, it's Carpenter's Gothic. Anyhow, this cathedral was largely a soft, porous redwood, which had been varnished probably 50 times. And if a fire started anywhere in it by intention or otherwise, it couldn't have been saved, because it was just a fire trap. And the fire did start about, I don't know what time it started, 10 or 12 o'clock at night or something, when there was no one in the building or whatever. But this was an opinion of an old teacher of mine, Brother Conrad, who's still alive and who lives at Sacred Heart College. He's retired. He said they burned it down until they shut him up. Well, he should have known, because he was supplying altar boys to to the cathedral. I suppose I did all right in school. My father died in 1918, and we were property poor when he died, because unlike conditions of World War II, all the money and the activity was on the West Coast, and except for the food brokers of San Francisco, who were supplying the government with canned goods and coffee and sugar. There was enormous speculation in sugar. And when the market fell out of sugar after the last World War, there were many fortunes, including that of James Rolfe Jr., the mayor of San Francisco from 1912 to 1930, when he was elected governor of California, and who died as governor of California a couple of years after he was elected. He was wiped out, and for the rest of his life was in debt to the Fleischhacker's Anglo National Bank, which became the Anglo-California National Bank, and which was recently, well, I say recently, in the last 15 years, conglomerated into the Crocker Citizens National Bank of Los Angeles, which is now simply called the Crocker Bank. But the property values in San Francisco plummeted. There was not too much industrial activity here in connection with the war, as there was when the war was in the South Pacific, and everyone came through San Francisco on their way to the South Pacific, and wives and families lived here, and the armed forces leaving spent their money and that sort of thing. So we were property poor for for several years, and my father by this time had owned about 10% of the Independent Laundry, which was building up a sinking fund to build its own laundry in time, and through the machinations of the attorney for my father's estate, we were finagled out of our interest in the Independent Laundry. The Bank of America called for payments on loans on real estate we owned, and we had to raise the money, and we sold the stock for $2.50 a share that 10 years later was worth $90. As a matter of fact, when one of the union-backed banks of Cleveland or Cincinnati came out here to San Francisco and endeavored to organize all of the laundries into a trust, which was a sort of union racketeer deal in those days. They offered $90 a share for the Independent Laundry, which at that time was in a new modern plant, which was had such an enormous steam generating plant that it was selling steam to other plants in the neighborhood, such as Sussman and Worms, or a packing plant and that sort of thing. So this is the way attorneys get rich, and of course relatives cheat the widows and orphans, although I've had occasion to laugh at some of the people who trimmed my father. It didn't do them a hell of a lot of good. They didn't end up exactly on Skid Row, but they didn't end up happily after drinking some of that Prohibition booze during the 1920s and 30s either.
Were there a lot of, or were there, talking about Prohibition, was this area a very popular area for speakeasies?
Oh, yeah. Most of the speakeasies in the Mission District were on Valencia Street, or many of them, I'd say, because Valencia Street, like 23rd Street, was originally the business street in the Mission, such as it was in the early days, at the time of the fire. But after the fire, Mission Street took over as the business district. So there were always a lot of vacant stores. See, Howard and Valencia were residential streets largely, and then as the areas in back of them and in front of them grew up, they became business streets in part. You could build a store anywhere in those days. There was no city planning or anything. So there were always a lot of vacant stores on Valencia Street in the 1920s, and these were turned into bootleg joints. And there were many of them here on on 24th Street. You see, after the fire, there were all sorts of small businesses in San Francisco, plumbers and carpenters and painters who couldn't find regular work opened shops. And there was a plumbing shop in this block, a carpenter shop, a painter, alternately all along the street.
On 24th Street.
Yeah, yeah. And then, of course, candy stores, groceries, and saloons and that sort of thing. But after World War II, as the unions became more highly organized and made agreements for licensing and more or less limiting the number of contractors and that sort of thing, and put in all sorts of city ordinances relative to permits and inspections, these people who were in their little repair shops and businesses were gradually frozen out in favor of larger organizations. There are independent small plumbers in San Francisco, and there are small carpenters, but not in the great numbers that they used to be all over town. And they usually occupy a garage somewhere for their plant. They don't have the shops in streets and stores. This was one of the results of the licensing. Every time you hear about any licensing, such as the state is now going to try to impose on these so-called gyp auto mechanics, you'll find that it's going to cost you in 2 or 3 years twice as much as they gyp you out of now, because they're going to limit the number of outlets where a person can do business, and the wages go up, and there's a hell of a lot of water in all these things. Whereas, when I had my cars in the 1920s and 30s, I never paid over $2.50 or $3 for a repair. Now they tell me if you walk into one of these places, you're lucky to get out for less than $100 or so. The things, of course, the motors have improved or become more involved. I could probably make most of my own repairs. But I had a mechanic out on San Bruno and Silver, and he very rarely charged me over $3 or $4 for a repair. So this licensing and limiting, even in the 1910s up to around 1925, one didn't require a real estate or an insurance license to go into business. You didn't have to post a bond or have insurance into the hundreds of dollars of premiums for public liability and whatnot. You just shoved off and started up, and you became an expert in time.
There still are seem to be a number of Irish bars still in the Mission District in terms of.
Oh yeah, well, the Italians, for example, are not envious and jealous of the Irish. They may be, because I'm not an Italian, I don't know, but they tend to copy the Irish. Where an Italian's name is Pasquale, this is a well-known first name of an Italian, he becomes Pat. And this occurs all over the country. They give over these old Italian names, and they generally, in sports and in everywhere, they assume Irish Catholic names. What was that question you asked me?
Talking about speakeasy.
Oh, the bars, yeah, the bars. Well, the so-called Luck of the Irish, which is based on Lesage's French play Gil Blas, written in the 18th century. The luck of the Irish is an offshoot of a phrase in that play, there is nothing too good for the Irish. So the Irish are imitated. And even down in the Olympic Club, which is the oldest of the American athletic clubs, it's well over 100 years old now. The Irish went in there after Jim Corbett became champion of the world when he defeated John L. Sullivan in the 1890s. And perhaps about 30 years later, in the 1910s and 1920s, second or third generation Italians began to join the Olympic Club. And they now have the St. Patrick's Day golf tournament out at Lakeside, out at the two courses at the so-called country home of the Olympic Club, the Ocean Course and the Lake Course. And this is the Irish versus the Italians, you see.